why weren't the Allies and the USSR more prepared to help prisoners during and post World War II? And so you did have sort of a part of your dissertation kind of dedicated to that, where you did talk about the Jews being put together with the people who may have collaborated or at least kind of allowed it to happen, didn't stop this kind of thing of happening. Them being sort of isolating, the Jews being isolated in camps, etc. And kind of, I think you said that people were kind of organized based on nationality, rather than being victims and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Uh,
And yes, and this is very often criticized by the academics and historians, and I completely agree with all of them. But as I said earlier, this administration of the camps, it was done in this sort of way because it was the best solution they could think of at the time, I think. And they didn't realize they were putting them together with the people who were who slaughtered their families and friends and relatives. It just didn't occur to them. It was a gradual process of um, realizing those things and learning those things.
okay,
So
so
it was really unfortunate step on their part, but gradually and uh, gradually they opted for segregation in the end.
given that there
Sorry.
was, it's fine. Given that there was one medical officer to every 650 patients, and a nursing sister for every 150 patients, do you think that the Allies gave as many medical professionals as they could, or do you think they kept many of them back to help within sort of their own nation states? Obviously the UK and France.
Yes, I think that many were kept back in the nation states, but then I can't really say for sure because I haven't, to be honest, I haven't looked into this particular issue uh, any any deeply. So, but yeah, my guess is they were kept back, and also um, they they didn't expect to find such a vast amount of people in horrible state. So then it would be really difficult for them to call on for reinforcements and to transport them into Europe.
Okay.
Uh, Also, adding to that, uh, I know that the military there were some military restrictions as well because they were trying to keep uh, as many people out of Europe as possible until they knew for sure that the enemy was defeated and there was no danger for them. So this was particularly the case of, or in the case of Jewish relief organizations, they let them in late summer 1945,
Oh, and that makes a
which
lot of
is
sense. Yeah,
yeah.
because you don't want your medical professionals and sort of health groups being taken captive or being killed by the Nazis in this case, because that would make the situation way worse. So you want to secure the area first, which
Mm.
sounds very standard military practice. You talk about in the, I think it's the next paragraph, where you talk about Western allies opting for segregation along the line of national lines, which is something we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and putting Jewish survivors with Nazi collaborators and anti-Semites, and then you kind of go on to talk about the misconceptions that the Allies kind of had. But from some of the stuff that I've read, obviously you're far more knowledgeable, especially in this regard, than I am. There were many Jews who warned the UK government about what was going on within Nazi Germany. So how much of a misconception could there have been if to an extent the UK governments and other governments were warned about what was going on within Nazi Germany?
Mm. Yeah, good question. Uh, this yeah, there was a lot of misconception on the part of the UK government, and for that matter, that was even true for other European governments. But yeah, I think they weren't listening properly to the survivors and their concerns and needs, and this is even visible in the testimonies and memoirs of survivors. They would often go to the authorities and plead for a different system of housing, for example. But it took them a long time to actually take these pleas so seriously. So they weren't willing to
kind of listen,
listen
and
listen.
kind of so
yes.
And so I guess it kind of makes sense. Obviously, we're not, saying that, oh, I could have done it better if I was in 1940s, because I would have probably goofed as well, probably way worse. But I guess the point being is that had, the authorities actually listened to, Jewish people and other people who were fleeing at the time, then perhaps, the humanitarian effort post the war would have been a lot more better and a lot more effective, especially when you look at kind of the horror show of the pictures and how kind of malnourished and how much people suffered, I think, under, Nazi occupation. Perhaps then the humanitarian effort could have been a lot better. Would you kind of agree with that? Disagree?
I think I would disagree, because the governments knew prior to war. They knew about all the repressions that were going on in Nazi Germany against the Jews. Media were reporting it, and people were mostly aware that there was something, dodgy going on, but nobody was willing to confront the obviously dangerous militant Germany that was on the rise at the time. Also, the Jews were only started being locked up after the Kristallnacht in 1938.
Kristallnacht, is that the night of broken glass?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So, and it was not on such a scale as we know was later on, in 1940s. So they wouldn't be able to prepare any better strategy in terms of humanitarian aid, because nothing, well, no genocide was occurring at the time.
Okay.
It was only at the later stage.
The final solution, yeah.
Yes, and even then, I don't think they would believe, really. They wouldn't take it seriously, because there were obviously messages and reports of gas chambers and stuff. But then the war happened, and it just they had other stuff on their minds. So
do you think they didn't want to believe it was happening? Do you think it could be a bit of sort of denialism, like, yeah, it's not, come on, man, it's not that bad?
Yeah, it could be. It wouldn't be uncommon. Yeah.
Okay.
That happened even among Jewish community,
I mean, yeah,
when they were.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sir. No, go on. That's okay.
So, I mean, people still deny it nowadays. So, like, people are like, oh, it didn't happen, or things weren't that bad. So, and we know a lot more now. Like, you can physically visit the places that some of these things happened. I think in Berlin you can actually go to a concentration camp. Obviously, the Auschwitz, the death camp still exists. You can go and see it. So people still deny it to this day. So I guess, it wouldn't be the hardest thing in the world to believe that some of these kind of world leaders didn't, believe them, or didn't want to believe them.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
All right. So, is there anything you want to add to that, or?
I think just one thing. I think nobody could really imagine that something like this would happen. It was really horrible and really unimaginable, and even from the testimonies of the soldiers that liberated the camps, you can feel how disgusted and how unbelievable it was for them to find those people in such horrible conditions and such a horrible state. Just heaps of corpses everywhere. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that?
Something like this could happen. Yeah, yeah, 100% understand. So if we go on to, I think it's the next paragraph where it says Western allies, on the other hand, were to be stuck with the survival issue for years. Nevertheless, not all survivors had a place to return to. For example, German Jews and I think it says 20 Polish Jews gradually formed the largest part of the non-repatriable, as their homes were destroyed, occupied, or they simply did not wish to return there because of their harrowing past, which makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't, you really might not want to go back to a place where you were abducted and you're lucky to be alive at this point. To be honest, and you talk about here where it says some people, some of the people who returned were not welcome back and faced atrocious hate. What do you think of that? Imagine sort of going, being abducted by people. And being put in essentially concentration camps and death camps, and then once you are taken home, you still get a lot of that treatment. What kind of countries were doing that, and how do you feel about that?
This was definitely abhorrent deeds, and I can't understand how this could be happening. But people are hateful, and the propaganda was rampant, and just people had these prejudices, but in them still pretty hard. So yeah, it must have been difficult times. So this was usually happening in Eastern Europe, and particularly in Poland, where anti-Semitism was very high. So people would return. They would want to go back to their home, to their house, and these houses would usually be already occupied by somebody else, who the Germans
Had assigned to that house, yeah.
kind of assigned to that. Yeah, exactly. And these people would mostly they wouldn't want the Jews to come back. They didn't expect the Jews to come back. For that matter.
That is a phenomenal point, actually. That makes a lot of sense, because you could imagine, given how rampant the propaganda was, combined with a lot of pre-existing views about Jewish people, you could imagine a lot of shock, kind of saying that, could you imagine, like, if, you've returned home, someone else is living in your home, and they're like, you should be dead.
Yeah.
You're, throw in anti-Semitic quotes here and there. And, that's a phenomenal point, actually. I didn't think of it like that. That's well put.
Yeah.
So we go further on. It talks about, you've talked about here how kind of Jews were kind of relocated to the occupied areas of Germany, Austria, and Italy. So do you think that mainly Jews from Eastern Europe who were kind of moved into these sort of countries?
So that were either people who couldn't return home straight away after the liberation, and they stayed in the liberated camps for some time because, I don't know, they had typhus or they were treating some other disease, and then they were moved or stayed in the former concentration camps that were later on made into displaced people's camps. Or these people might have also been refugees from the east. So Jews who have already returned from the concentration camps, they returned home, they were rejected over there, faced pogroms and other violent attacks, and they decided they would come back because they had no other place to go. Or they were also Jews who were on the refuge from communism, so from the Soviet Union
as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. You got to imagine they're running really from two groups of barbarians, really. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of, if we move on to our next question, because it still kind of links into this a bit.